The war between Ukraine and Russia is escalating substantially. I need to play you a video clip, which if you've seen it before, fast forward a little bit, but you need to see this video clip because it's going to show you some of the passion that is going into the war here in America, especially as our politicians are starting to get attacked for their failures to negotiate a solution. After I show you this video clip, I will also show you reactions from these politicians, and we'll discuss some of the latest disasters that are going on, from talk about a nuclear dirty bomb and a cancellation of a brokered Ukrainian grain export deal, which just happened today. Also, keep in mind, my hearts go out to those in Seoul, South Korea, who have lost their lives at a Halloween party by being crushed in a crowd. Absolutely terrible, but so is the loss of life in Ukraine and Russia. And boy, oh boy, take a look at this clip.
Congresswoman, none of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard, she's left the Democratic Party because they're a bunch of war hawks. Okay? You originally voted, you ran as an outsider, yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine. You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China. Why are you playing with the lives of American citizens? You're playing with our lives.
There will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. You voted to mobilize and send money to Ukrainians. You're a coward. You're a progressive socialist. Where are you against the war mobilization? He's telling the right truth. You have done nothing. Tulsi Gabbard has shown guts where you've shown cowardice. I believed in you, and you became the very thing you sought to fight against. That's what you've become. You are the establishment, and you are the reason why everybody will end up in a nuclear war unless you choose to stand up right now and denounce the Democratic Party. Will you do that? Yes or no?
All right, so here's the lay of the land. On one hand, you have Ukrainians who suggest there's absolutely no way we are going to negotiate any kind of settlement with Russia. We deserve Crimea, we deserve the land of the Donbass and the other eastern regions of Ukraine. We will not carve out a buffer zone of Ukraine and give it to a dictator like Putin. Absolutely not. We will do whatever we need to do to get the world's attention and get the world's support. And so far, they have been getting the world's support. The U.S. has sent over $17 billion of aid to Ukraine. You've got countries like Germany sending nearly $1 billion in aid to Ukraine in missile launchers and artillery and air defense systems. You name it. A lot of support has been driven to Ukraine, and a lot of folks believe that the support being driven to Ukraine is actually emboldening Ukraine purposefully not to negotiate with Russia. The more weapons Ukraine gets, the more they can fight and take back their own land, and the more Putin is potentially backed into a corner where he has no off-ramp to declare any semblance of victory from this war, potentially giving rise to the fears of a nuclear-armed conflict. This has recently given credence to this idea that Ukraine could potentially be setting up purposeful false flags to bring more attention to Ukraine. There are suggestions that Ukraine was responsible for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, potentially even in coordination with the United States or Western allies. There are arguments that Ukraine was responsible for blowing up the bridge between Crimea and Russia. That's the Kerch Strait Bridge, and it was damaged substantially by explosions when gas-filled vehicles were targeted and blown up while they were on the bridge, destroying a part of the bridge. There are also beliefs that anything Ukraine can do to make the world have more pain by making energy costs go up via, for example, the Nord Stream pipeline being damaged. Of course, some say no, that was Russia. Others say, why would Russia do that? They could just turn off the tap, whatever. This isn't a video about the Nord Stream pipeline, right? But the argument is anything potentially Ukraine could do to make the world suffer more pain potentially brings more attention to Ukraine and more weapons to Ukraine. For example, just today, Ukraine attacked Russian Navy ships with kamikaze drones, and that led Russia to say, that's it. when we invaded, we stopped all grain exports from Ukraine. That led the prices of grain to explode. Wheat futures skyrocketed when Russia invaded on February 24th. Fortunately, they collapsed when the United Nations and Turkey, on behalf of Ukraine and Russia, negotiated a settlement to allow a safe harbor passage for Ukrainian grain, which before the war provided 10% of the world's grain, often deemed the world's breadbasket, to allow grain to be safely exported from Ukraine. However, after this drone attack on Russian ships, Russia says that's it. That deal is over. And so many make the argument that the more pain Ukraine or even Russia can cause for the rest of the world, the more Ukraine and Putin get attention, and the more the world says, what can we give you to stop? Because you're making poor people suffer because the cost of grain is going up, and when the cost of wheat goes up, the cost of rice goes up as it's a complementary good, or supplementary good, right? And supplements will increase in value when one becomes restricted in supply, or the cost of it goes up. Basically in English, okay? When there ain't enough bread, you eat rice, okay? Simple. That leads the cost of rice to go up. The problem is when 40% of the world lives on less than $2 a day, what you do is you create starvation and famine across the rest of the world, and you create more inflation, which creates more issues for people investing in the stock market. Not that that is really a big priority here when we're talking about lives, but the point is, it hurts everyone, okay? Inflation hurts everyone. This is leading to more calls to say, okay, well, this is exactly why more weapons need to be sent to Ukraine, but on the other hand, that's giving rise to the idea that no, Ukraine just needs to settle down, come up with a negotiated peace deal, stop ruining people's lives by continuing the war going on, and leading to more global inflation. Of course, Ukraine says this is ridiculous. We are being illegally invaded in 2022. The world should be standing behind us, and we should be driving over into Russia and attacking them, which they've already started sending rockets into Russian territory and attacking Russian territory. And this has led the president of Germany, the Chancellor of Deutschland, to actually pause and give some pause to the amount of weapons they're sending over to Ukraine. Again, they've already sent modern air defense systems. They sent rocket launchers, artillery, dozens of anti-aircraft guns. They have supported Ukraine since day one. However, recently, Mr. Schultz has refused to provide Ukraine with Leopard battle tanks or infantry fighting vehicles, which Ukraine keeps asking for. And this is seen as a pivot by Germany because Germany is suggesting that, hey, look. We are now under threats of nuclear strike. This might be nuclear blackmail, but we are not going to take a risk with this, and we can't give you weapons that are offensive. On top of that, now in America, you've got this big drive about realizing, crap, like, as you saw in that video at the beginning, there is a military-industrial complex, which very simply put, probably oversimply put, is kind of like, hey, I'm Lockheed Martin, and I make really expensive rockets. I'll sell you rockets for $120,000 a rocket. And boy, I love it when they go pew, 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 because we make lots of money. And hey, politician, here's a little envelope, can you keep this going? And so that has led to this belief that, okay, there is this perverse idea of potentially keeping war going because of the profits in military. The opportunity in military to sell more weapons and get the old stuff off the shelf and sell new stuff that has to then restock the shelves, right? But while that's happening, which is obviously very unpopular, you also have now concerns that are rising that suggest, look, dude, who's getting all the weapons? Because when you just send $17 billion to Ukraine, you don't actually just send them money and make it rain over there with money. You send them shipments of weapons. You send them containers like that sit on the back of a semi-truck, and you open it up and it's full of rockets, right? It's full of javelin missiles, javelin launchers that you could launch missiles with, right? And those are very expensive pieces of equipment. The launcher itself is worth like over $1 million. Each missile is worth over $100,000. And you have to ask yourself, if you're living in Ukraine, getting paid by the military $10,000 for the entire year, and you're worried about your family surviving, and you're like, I'm holding a $120,000 rocket, F this, I'm gonna take this box of rockets, I'm gonna throw them on my Prius, and I'm gonna go sell it on the black market for twice the value. So let's say you have 5 rockets and you go sell it for twice the value, you could walk away with $1 million. Now, extremists or potentially our enemies have their hands on weapons that are being supplied by America to Ukraine. It's a battleground. We don't know if it's Russians stealing it, if it's Ukrainians stealing it, but all of the weapons definitely aren't going where they should be going. People have already been caught and arrested trying to smuggle weapons out of these battlefield areas. And remember, when people die in war, there's loot on the floor, okay? And this sounds like really crazy to potentially compare war to a video game. But I mean, look, the sad reality is if you've got a whole military contingent of 200 people and they had access to artillery weapons or multiple javelins, assault rifles, whatever it is, well, that's good loot for the other side, but not just for them. It's also good loot for the people who just pick the stuff up, sell it on the black market, send it to the Middle East, and now other countries have these weapons, and potentially terrorist organizations have these weapons. It is terrible, terrible. The more weapons like these missiles or expensive and advanced weapons that we have on the battlefield, the more likely they are to be lost and fall into hands of those who should not have them. And that's just unfortunately the nature of war. And that's why you've got folks saying we are trending towards an uncomfortable escalation in this war, potentially even now talk about a dirty bomb going off. Now, a dirty bomb, in case you're not familiar, is basically like a suitcase nuke. And when it explodes, the goal is to send nuclear fallout across a very large region. I mean, you could have a cloud of fallout that ends up blowing from Ukraine over into parts of Eastern and maybe even as far as Western Europe. That would wake up the entire world to the potential of a nuclear-armed escalation. Russia calls this all a false flag and suggests, no, we don't need nukes because we're already winning so much. But this is why fingers are being potentially pointed at, suggesting that, oh, well, maybe Ukraine will do it, making it look like Russia did it. And of course, if Russia were to do it, they would want to make it look like Ukraine did it, right? I mean, this is just war propaganda at this point. But the point is, the fact that we're even talking about nukes is disgusting. And this is leading a lot of folks to say, Biden, you need to wake up. In fact, after AOC was ridiculed, 30 House Democrats have now written a letter to the Biden administration encouraging a diplomatic track with Moscow. Per a letter sent to the Biden administration, they're calling for a dramatic shift, a realistic framework for a ceasefire, finally waking up the politicians, finally trying to give Putin an off-ramp so he could say he won, but also while getting peace back to Ukraine and focusing on rebuilding. AOC, after getting ridiculed, is obviously now part of that letter because criticism and AOC don't go together. But in other words, she don't like that, okay? Anyway, so then again, nobody really likes criticism. Of course, in recent weeks, things have not been getting any better either because you've got Russia sending kamikaze drones into Kyiv, hitting apartment buildings, killing people, knocking out electricity. We've got cruise missiles hitting electricity plants. No electricity means no water, no gas. Hospitals running on generators using reserves for water and oxygen. You've got internet outages. You just have a complete disaster. And some of the air offensives that we've seen over the last few weeks have been a lot worse. And even cyber attacks have been a lot worse than what we've seen since the beginning of the war. So things are not getting better. Things are getting worse. It's very, very stressful. Really, it seems like at this point, some form of negotiated solution needs to be a top priority of the world because the world is going to be dealing with higher food prices for longer, higher energy prices for longer, and quite frankly, there are just going to be more deaths for longer. And if we don't get a negotiated solution, the odds of any kind of nuclear conflict continue to rise, and it's terrible. Anyway, that's a complete update for you. If you found it helpful, consider sharing the video. If it makes you nervous at all, make sure to get life insurance in as little as 5 minutes by going to metkevin.com/life. You can Apple Pay or Android Pay for it. It's the same life insurance that I use and my wife Lauren uses.